The 49ers just lost another game, and it's feeling really weird around the facility. You're there, I'm there. Travarius Ward told Mike Silver after the game yesterday, something's really weird about this team, and we're feeling it. They collapsed again. They did it 2 weeks ago in LA. They had a 10-point lead, a double-digit lead, and lost. This time they had a 13-point lead and lost. And it turns out, according to AP's Josh Dubow, Kyle Shanahan, as a head coach of the Niners, now has lost a franchise record 18th game while leading at 1 point by at least 10 points. I'll read out the list of most in Niners history. It's 1, Shanahan with 18, Bill Walsh, 8 in 10 years, Dick Nolan, 8 back in the 70s, Steve Mariucci, 6, Buck Shaw, 6. Haven't gotten word on where Jim Harbaugh ranked, but it must have been less than 6. This is an alarming pattern with Kyle Shanahan that goes back to his days in Atlanta. It's crazy to have a stat attached to it. What do you think of it?
Well, it's really interesting. I my sense of it is that Kyle's too pass happy. I like Kyle. I think very highly of Kyle. I think he's too pass happy. And I went back and I decided to look it up because I had to look it up. And I looked this up, Grant, the 5 biggest losses of Kyle's career. And this is just my opinion. I took out the NFC Championship game against Philly because Purdy got knocked out in the 6th play and it distorted the stats. So I look at his 5 biggest losses of his NFL career. OC in Atlanta, they lose the Super Bowl up 28-3. Super Bowl 54, they lost to the Chiefs. NFC title game, they lost to the Rams in LA. They lost to the Ravens last year on Christmas, and then they lost the Super Bowl last year. In my opinion, Grant, those are the 5 biggest losses of his career. In these 5 losses, his teams have run 109 times and passed 169 times. In other words, they're 61% pass, 39% run. He gets too pass happy, and it has consistently burned him. It's not like, I wonder why he keeps losing all of these huge games. It's the same reason every time, and it's the same reason they lost yesterday, Grant. Yesterday, he's going up against a Cardinal run defense that was 28th in the league, that allowed the Commanders the week prior to run for 216 yards. And despite the fact that the Niners led after the first quarter, the second quarter, and the third quarter, they only ran 43% of the time, 26 times total. They threw it 35 times, 57%. And in reality, we were talking before the show, when you actually think of the Brock runs, actual dropbacks versus handoffs, we're talking about 41 passes and 22 runs against a Cardinals defense that's the worst in the game and got gutted the week before. I love Shanahan. I think the world of Shanahan. I think he's a really good coach. I'm not saying fire him, but he gets too pass happy in many of these games, and it has burned him over and over again.
Yeah, and it's like he's been doing it. He's done it 18 times. He's done it in all of his big collapses have the same pattern, like you said, passing too much. At a certain point, if you're a player on his team, like, aren't you looking at him like, this is your fault? This is what you do. Here you go again. We lost another game. We were up 10 points, and you started passing the ball, and none of us figure out. We don't understand why you do this. But it's something that you do consistently year after year. And at a certain point, how do you not lose confidence in a guy? It's like, I understand that he's really good at racking up yards. He's great at it. But at that point in the game, you're more concerned with grinding down the clock than racking up yards at any, at any cost. That's something that Jim Harbaugh understood. He didn't have highly ranked offenses, but his offenses wouldn't lose games for his team.
The other thing that you can point to in those big games, every single time you're going up against the better quarterback. The better quarterback was always on the other side, and yet you wind up passing more than running. And those Atlanta teams were really good running teams. The 49ers have been a really good running team. Heck, you had Christian McCaffrey last year. The offensive player of the year was your running back. This year, Mason has just been rumbling. He rumbled in this game yesterday for 6.4 yards a carry. And still, it's pass, more pass. And you sit there and you wonder, how many times can you How many times is the old definition of insanity? How many times can you do something, the same thing repeatedly, expecting to have a different result? It's getting tired.
And I think some fans struggle with like, well, when do you know when to criticize the head coach, when to hold the head coach responsible for a certain issue? I think when it happens 18 times the same way, you got to look at him. Like, why are you passing in these situations? What is it about your makeup is leading you to make the same wrong decision every time?
And it's not about their quarterback, because a lot of times he's doing this with Jimmy Garoppolo.
Right.
I mean, he was throwing more than he was running, and he had Jimmy Garoppolo at quarterback in some of those teams, some of these games that we're talking about.
I just think it's fair to look at him as like a guy who's erratic under pressure. I mean, he's not stupid. He knows football, but it seems like if defenses show a certain front or bring out a certain personnel grouping, Kyle will say, well, I can't run the ball anymore, even though he's averaging 6 yards a carry. Against this look, we got to pass the ball. Not necessarily. If your goal is to optimize yards per play, maybe, but in the fourth quarter up 10, it's about the clock more than it's about yards. And I think he loses sight of that. And I think that's why the criticism of him is that he's more of a coordinator than a head coach. Your job as a head coach, more than having an explosive offense, is to be able to close it out if you have a 10-point lead. I feel like a good head coach is sort of expected to seal the deal. End of story. I don't care about your offense. You're the head coach. Find a way to win when you're up 10 plus points. And he finds a way to lose way too often for a guy who's supposed to be elite at his job.
And it's basically the same reason every time. Like every one of those losses, I didn't go looking at those games thinking, I wonder what I'll find. I kind of knew in the back of my head, they almost every single one of these games, they threw the ball more than they ran the ball. They threw the ball more than they should have run the ball. Here's why it really doesn't make sense. Their offensive line is totally mediocre, and it's a better run blocking line than a pass protection line for sure. And then, of his receivers, I kind of think his receivers look kind of slow, to be honest. I mean, I don't see anybody among their receivers that anybody's afraid that's going to run by them, especially with IU kind of rounding into form. He played better yesterday, but he doesn't look like he looks like he's lost a step. He's the deep threat. The rest of the Deebo Samuel, what would you say you did yesterday? Yeah, I mean, maybe Deebo should have gone back and maybe carried the boom box out instead of having somebody else carry it out, because I thought he was preserving himself for what he was going to do the rest of the day. Instead, if he had carried that boom box, it would have been his biggest contribution of the day. So I don't know. Kyle got too pass happy. The O-line struggles in pass protection. The wide receivers don't get separation. They're really not good in the red zone. I mean, and that's just the offensive side of the ball. I mean, I got a whole myriad of complaints about the defensive side. We haven't even touched special teams at this point. But offensively, the Niners are way, way, way too talented to be scoring 16 points. 16 points and shut out in the second half against the Arizona Cardinals. Who's their big dominator on their defensive line? I mean, seriously, Roy
Bilal
Lopez.
Nichols.
Yeah, Bilal Nichols.
I don't.
Come on, man.